Just some more background. So Segev LLP, we have a dedicated iGaming team of 6 lawyers, Canadian and U.S. lawyers, some former general counsel for Indian gaming tribes, but our in the land-based facilities. But our core strength is online. I want to thank everyone for coming out. Some of you may have had a late night. I did not, thankfully, and I appreciate you coming here. Just going to run through my favorite slide. Just a little bit of housekeeping there, and let's get into it. Okay, so by way of context, my practice is primarily focused in online real money gambling. And a lot of people ask me what that means. Regulatory is a small part of it. We do a lot of commercial work. So I do what any regular technology lawyer would do. We're active in corporate finance, we're active in M&A, commercial licensing, and so forth. But this session is all about the regulatory and compliance side of things, okay? So at a high level, in simple language, there's 3 questions that we're going to look at. First, do you have the games to go real money, or are you close? Do you need a license, given the games that you have or what you're up to? What are some of the issues that you need to be concerned about? And then finally, how do you get in? So we're going to cover this in 4 parts. That's the first part, fine line between the social game and casino game mechanics. Some of you are sitting on social games that might actually be deemed a casino in certain legal jurisdictions. We're going to talk about some of the existing and emerging iGaming markets. I've classified them in terms of regulated and unregulated. There's a lot of euphemisms in this industry. I'll share some of those with you. We're going to talk about entering the iGaming market, mostly from a regulatory and licensing perspective. And then we're going to try to put the pieces together. Hopefully we'll have enough time for it. Okay, let's deal with our first topic, which is the game mechanic. Okay, from a legal perspective, gambling is broadly defined in similar terms in most common law jurisdictions. So that's the UK, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. And there is a fine distinction from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but at a high level you can confidently say that for something to be a gambling game, it has to have 3 elements. It has to have the element of consideration, which is I'm making a bet. The game needs to be either a game of chance or needs to have an element of chance in it. And you need a prize of some kind. Okay, so let's dive in. A lot of my clients will approach me and say, oh, I've got this, moneymaker idea. It's a game. It works just like a casino, but there's no prize. Or it's a skill slot. Or it's free to play. So it's not gambling, right? And so what I usually do is I try to break down the game mechanic. So you'll see in this slide, a typical social game will say, will strip out one of the 3 elements. It might not have consideration, it might be a free-to-play, or it might not have a prize. Most social slots or social casino-style games will have an element of skill, an element of chance in the game. In the other column, a real money slot will definitely have consideration. It's usually cash. Will definitely have an element of chance, and the prize is cash. That's why people are there. So when I'm sitting with this client who's very enthusiastic and I'm breaking down his game mechanic, we start running through some ideas. Okay, so someone's not putting a credit card in, but are they providing some other form of consideration? Do you get chips if you share your gameplay with 5 friends on Facebook? Is that a form of consideration? What if you do some affiliate work and you send 3 or 4 referrals that are depositing players? What if you have to complete a survey? What if you have to sit through an ad? All of that's really valuable. What about in-game purchases that improve your odds or help you clear levels, right? So initially, when you first visit the site, it'll say, oh, it's free to play, but then they start throwing gates at you, and if you can clear those gates and improve your odds of winning something, and there's a prize at the other end, we have to have a talk. what is a game of chance or mixed skill of chance? That definition is different in many jurisdictions. So in the United States, there's three broad tests that are applied differently in different states. There's a dominant factor test, there's a material element test, there's an any chance test. Different states subscribe to different tests. Canada, for example, has something called a common resort test. Does the game have a common resort to chance? And then some jurisdictions will flat out ban card games. So you might have a card game that is absolutely a game of skill. For example, duplicate poker. And, you know, many statisticians think that poker is a game of skill. I would tend to agree with them if you look at the numbers. Duplicate poker even more so, but if it's a card game, then you're hooped. Does your quote-unquote skill game have an RNG? A lot of people don't think about this. So I had a client who was interested in taking console games and creating a lobby and peer-to-peer betting environment where he could take a rake, and he thought, oh, they're betting on skill games. And you know, if it's a pure physics engine, yeah, it might be a skill game, but if there's any element of chance, you have to worry about that. Prizes, Bitcoin, iPads, coupons, you know, free hugs. You know, what's a prize? You got to look at that. What if the prize is worth less than the buy-in, like at a Chuck E. Cheese, right? We could look at that too. What about an intangible, like a skin, or badges, or points, or status? So some courts in some jurisdictions are looking at this as an actual prize. And there was a fairly high-profile case, I believe last year. I wish I had more details on it, but it's just coming to mind now, of a avid gamer in China whose account got corrupted and he had lost, you know, 1 trillion points and all his badges, and he committed suicide. So this has real value to players. Gaming companies understand that, and so courts are starting to look at this now. Okay, so what we've just done is examine your game, your quote-unquote social game. It's two outcomes. I say to the client, congratulations, you're already operating a casino. Or I say, you're pretty close. Now let's see what we can do with it. Okay, and so the choice is usually one of two ways. We pull back and we go more purely social because they don't want to be a gambling company, or we own it and we see what we can do with it. Okay, so if we're owning the game and we're going to say, you know what, you're so close to being a casino, let's see if we can make money with this. The question is, where are we making money? Okay, and generally the first question is, what sort of license do I need? And there's two approaches that that provide a convenient framework here. One is the license approach, which is where can I get a license? The second one is a market approach. Forget the license, where can I offer my games without a license? Let's look at the first one, the license approach. So where can I get a license? And implied in that is, if I have a license, I can offer my casino game lawfully from that jurisdiction. I can start making money as an online casino. So I like to classify it as two different classes. So there's the domestic regulators. Here's an example of a few of them. Some USA makes reference to Nevada, New Jersey, and Delaware. You could lump in some of the daily fantasy sports states that are offering licenses there too. So New York is a really good example of that one. Canada is a domestic regulator. Our provinces will conduct and manage gaming activity within their respective borders. Mexico has a licensing regime, and so forth and so on. Coming soon, more USA. That's always a big story for us. We're always looking at new states opening up. Colombia is now proposing some new legislation. Brazil is looking at regulating their poker. Some jurisdictions in Eastern Europe, there's always stuff opening up. It's hard to keep track of. So that's the domestic regulators, people who are looking after what's happening in their own backyard. International regulators, so Isle of Man, which is where PokerStars is located, Alderney, which is a Channel island between France and the UK, Malta, Gibraltar, and so forth. Philippines is an interesting case. Their licensing jurisdiction is called the First Cagayan Freeport Zone, And the last one's also interesting. It's the catalogue. It's an Indian tribe just outside of Montreal. It's the Mohawk Nation in Canada. We refer to them as First Nations. And coming soon. I say probably not in the international regulator bucket. And I don't see many jurisdictions rolling out a new international regulatory regime. Although some First Nations or Indian tribes or indigenous groups may be interested in entering the space, I think that would be a good fit for them. We saw an Indian tribe in Oklahoma about 3 years ago that was looking at doing a online poker site that would take international traffic, and ostensibly that would have turned them into an international regulator. It never went anywhere, but I could see that happening. Okay, a lot of people ask, well, why should I get this license? What does a Malta license give me? And so what it does is it provides you a base of operations. It might give you a legal defense if anyone comes after you and wonders what you're doing. You can say, oh, I have a license. Malta gave me a license. Go to my website. There's a badge there. The license is actually good in some jurisdictions. Some licensing regimes are highly respected as regulatory regimes, and they build confidence in your users, in the public. And then sometimes your industry partners are going to require you to be licensed, so you got to get a license. If you're a content supplier or you're a platform or ancillary service provider. The market approach. Okay, where can I offer my games? Well, you can offer them in regulated markets, and we covered that, and in unregulated or gray markets. So gray markets are very interesting. I'll have a client come up to me and say, we're going to adopt a gray market strategy, but I want to go light gray. And I'll say, okay, there's a 50 Shades of Grey joke, and that's the notion of light gray, dark gray, black. We always talk in those terms. That changes fairly quickly. You got to keep an eye on it. So unregulated or gray markets. So a gray market, if you're going to choose which gray market, the smart money usually makes a few choices. So the first one is, I'm going to enter this quote-unquote gray market. Is it legally defensible with a reasoned legal opinion? Can I get a law firm in that jurisdiction to tell me that what I'm doing is not unlawful? Okay, so PokerStars, for example, operates in Canada. There is an argument that what they're doing is not particularly kosher, but there's an argument that what they're doing is okay, and so they have that legal opinion. And the two sides of the coin make it a gray market. A gray market is one that's not explicitly prohibited or arguably lawful or not unlawful, right? These are all very, very measured terms. So, poker in the USA pre-IGEA, the Online Internet Gambling Enforcement Act dropped. People were waiting for the regulations to land to see how it was going to be applied. But prior to that, PokerStars was claiming that they were offering a game of skill. Some countries have silent or unclear laws. Some countries have no extraterritorial legal application, meaning they won't go after you. Because their legal regime doesn't contemplate that. Some countries are bound to international treaty obligations. So World Trade Organization dispute that Antigua brought against the United States is a very famous one. Treaty of Rome is interesting. It allows for the free movement of services, goods, and people through EU member states. And so in the early days, back in 05, 06, you saw a lot of European operators sue member states in the European Court of Justice saying that it's in contravention of the Treaty of Rome. Technically that still applies, but people have kind of dropped that approach and just decided to get domestic licenses everywhere. Okay, so which way to go? I'll present the options to a client. They'll say, well, what do I do? And usually it's a mix of both options. And you're taking a cost-benefits approach. You're looking at your existing licensing or future licensing plans. And the reason that's important is because if you want to get licensed in the state of Nevada, it's very onerous. They want to know what you've been up to, so you got to be careful. Looking at the location of your company and your people. Sometimes a licensing jurisdiction is going to require you to be situated or located in a particular place. You want to know, it's a gray market, but online gaming is under a criminal regime. You're going to jail, as opposed to you're going to get sent a cease and desist and pay a fine. There's bad actor issues. That relates to the first bullet. I don't want to become a bad actor in a market that's going to open up, right? So, California is the holy grail. I'm going to be really, really well behaved in that state. Personal issues, some people have different risk thresholds and tolerances and just don't want to deal with it. Might be an American citizen who's got family in China and just doesn't want to touch that. For the most part, this is a decision your board will come up with. Let's look at, real quick, regulatory and commercial landscape. The more mature the regulatory environment, the greater the need for a license. The more mature the commercial market, the greater the need for a differentiator. Europe, both. Get a license, find a differentiator. North America, both, but a bit different. Get a license or find a differentiator. Canada, I will say, is a bit different. You can talk to me about why. That's a separate presentation. Southeast Asia and East Asia, relatively unregulated. I put first Cagayan Freeport Zone in there because of their licensing regime. But what they are doing is allowing you to situate your operations in the Philippines without the risk of criminal prosecution. As long as you don't take Philippine money, they're fine with that. It's maturing. There's some other barriers, payment processing, and so forth. Latin America, similar. Regulatory is developing, it's evolving. I talked about Brazil and Colombia. Mexico's already has a regime. It's commercially maturing. Africa, regulatory is developing and commercially maturing. So that's a 30,000-foot view, of course. And I hate to lump all of Africa and Asia in one bundle, but I did it to North America, so it's fair. All right, entering the iGaming market. Here's some considerations. About 150 grand to get a license in Isle of Man, 10,000 to get one in Curacao. Way easier to get one in Curacao, right? So what do I get from Isle of Man that I can't get from Curacao? That's something you're going to wonder. What about the cost and durability of a legal opinion? You get a legal opinion for Kenya, but it's rule by law, it's not rule of law. How good is your legal opinion for? Am I going to need to get another one 6 months later? What about gaming tax? Kenya's proposing 30% gaming tax. UK point of sales tax or point of consumption tax is 15%, right? What about corporate tax? 0%, 5%. That will help you choose your base of operations. Ad standards and laws. Some jurisdictions will interfere with your ability to market the way you want to. What about the ongoing regulatory burden? The technical infrastructure, where do you have to host? Where do you have to keep your data? What kind of level of disclosure? I work with some clients who want to remain ghosts and they don't want to fill out a form. So you got to look at that too. Your post and future market plans and so forth. We've talked about that. I'm going to quickly cycle through these because I got swept off the stage. So how do you choose where to go? These are your typical influencers. What are you doing? Where are you located? How much time and money do you have to work with? Happy to share these slides with you if you come and see me. Let's put the pieces together. Here's a case study, okay? Here's a social client that comes up to me. Have a quick glance at these 7 bullets. This is what they tell me. Here's how we put the pieces together. Okay, social DFS, well, it's a skill in some jurisdictions, requires a license in others. That's the first note. Let's go for the low-hanging fruit and go for the skilled jurisdictions where I don't need a license. You've got your dev in California, you got a team in Poland, Manila. I'd say, oh, well, Poland might move to Malta. Work permits aren't an issue. Oh, that's an option. Manila, we can do a first Cagayan Freeport Zone office. We might have the language ability. You might want to be Asia-facing. Owners are American and travel frequently. That's a concern. There's FATCA issues if you're opening foreign bank accounts. Fundraising might be an issue. Some people don't like American, the technology, corporate finance community isn't particularly interested in investing in a Maltese company necessarily. They want to see the IP located in Delaware and licensed out or something like that. We talk about that. MVP focused, which means I don't have money. It doesn't mean that. That leads me to my characterization of DFS as a skill game. So let's say, you know what, it's a skill game. We'll go to low-cost licensed jurisdictions, meaning some US where I don't need a license to offer DFS. Curacao might be fine. PA means Panama. That might be fine. It's cheap, mixed reputation. There's liquidity issues too. So if a game requires liquidity, we got to be careful about that. Liquidity meaning a minimum threshold of traffic to make the game viable. You have a minimal marketing budget. Well, maybe partner with a platform, maybe find a land-based casino, maybe an Indian tribe. Risk-averse board. Let's get some legal opinions. Let's do some test markets, see if this is viable in the real money space. Branding and culture propositions. If this is your proposition, I'm trustworthy above board, I'm credible, I'm best in class. Will Curacao and Panama work as licensing jurisdictions? It might not. It might not send the right message to the community. So that's basically what we go through, and that's a 20-minute analysis around a very important decision. But that's the thinking behind it. That's the options behind it, and I'm happy to open the floor to questions if you have any.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. Just a very quick question, and I don't know enough about this to even ask the question in a sensible way, so bear with me on this. But I guess primarily from a jurisdictional perspective, but any other kind of gotchas that you can think of, if we're looking at other currencies, specifically cryptocurrencies, is there anything that's different about that we need to be aware of? Is it just considered yet another currency from all those kind of things?
Yeah, a great question. So using Bitcoin as an example, about 3 or 4 years ago, you saw a lot of quote-unquote Bitcoin casinos come up, thinking that it would skirt the consideration element, but most jurisdictions will see Bitcoin as consideration, whether it's characterized as a currency or as an asset. It doesn't really matter, right? If I go to a casino with gold, they'll take it, or they should, and so that's one bundle of issues, and then another thing that comes to mind is. If you are regulated, then your KYC and AML, your Know Your Client and anti-money laundering obligations, and all your reporting obligations and your document keeping, that might be hard if you're accepting Bitcoin. Certainly technical ways around it. You can in tandem collect the information you need to, but that might not speak to a coiner. Right.
On the social casino side of things, one thing that's becoming very popular today are sweepstakes-based promotions, one of which they do with coins being the no prize or credits within the game, so that's what the win is. And then the other one is by allowing people to sign up for free, but then they increase their chance of winning by basically getting, buying in-app purchases. So can you talk a little about those two different scenarios and how that, why people are doing that right now, and if you think that is actually legal or not legal?
Yeah, sweepstakes is really interesting. We've been busy in that space recently. The reason sweepstakes works is because it removes the consideration element, right? So no necessary or free entry alternative. Do you guys have McDonald's Monopoly here in the States? You do, yeah. So I can buy a hamburger, or I could fill out a little cue card or go online and submit that way. So that's the free entry alternative, no purchase necessary, removes consideration. It works really nicely with some game mechanics. We just did about a year ago, we launched for a DFS company that didn't want to get licensed in the States. We'd modified their game mechanic into a sweepstakes, and the only regulatory hurdle was posting bond and registering in the states of New York and Florida, which was super easy and inexpensive and very fast. And so I like the sweepstakes model. It's certainly top of mind. In terms of the second point that you brought up, which is free entry alternative or no purchase necessary, but once you're in game, you're given an opportunity to clear through levels or, conjure a screaming eagle or I don't know what. We have to be careful there. But the very quick way to think about that is, does my purchase help me? Does my purchase give me better odds of winning a prize than somebody else? Because if the answer is yes, then your no purchase necessary defense is degraded. So you got to be careful about that.
All right. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.